Achaemen has by far the most interesting arc in the story, and his plotline serves as the climax of the story as a whole. After living like a hermit for 20 years, Achaemen is finally given a kick in the ass by the arrival of Mimara, who I will talk about more later. In the intervening time, however, Achaemen reveals that his dreams have been changing over the years. Even though he has renounced his loyalties to the Mandate, he still suffers from all Seswatha's dreams, which he knows in intimate detail. Yet Achaemen is now beginning to notice changes, with new dreams cropping up. Notably, these dreams actually show the banalities of Seswatha's life. Previously, the dreams would only show the important parts of his life. Seswatha never shits, right? But with these banal sequences entering in, Achaemen initially does not know what to think. And as the story progresses, this is taken in interesting directions as the dreams continue to change, and not simply to reveal the banalities, but to even change in such a way that Achaemen's lies actually become truths. It's with this backdrop that the plotline centered on Achaemen comes into play. Achaemen decides to hire a group of scalpers, called the Skin Eaters, men who have refined a profession of hunting and killing Srank, to take him up north. He lies to them, telling them that he is seeking out the coffers, a major collection of treasure that supposedly resides in the ruins of Soglish. This is simply a facade designed to get Achaemen north, where he can then continue his search for Ishwal, which is the place where the Anasarimber line was preserved and where the Dunyain currently reside. This will reveal the origins and nature of Kellis, the man who has enslaved the world for the purposes of saving it. But while Achaemen is on this journey, he eventually gets a new dream that reveals that a map to Ishwal is located in Soglish, hidden in the coffers. So the lie he fed to the Skin Eaters is suddenly validated by his Seswatha dreams, telling him that he indeed needs to go to Soglish. At first, I thought that Bakker was just revealing the details of Achaemen's motivations as the story progressed, but it turned out that this was a new dream that did not come to him until after he set out on his journey. But now there has been another complication. I read the summary of the Judging Eye at the beginning of the next book, The White Luck Warrior, a summary that was written by Bakker himself. And the way he wrote it suggested that the dream actually did come before he set out to hire the Skin Eaters. Now I'm just confused because I thought the text was pretty clear. I don't know. Bakker is obscure, so I guess that's part of the package, right? I find this twist to be fascinating. First, Achaemen suggests that this implies that he is literally creating reality with his fiction. This opens a whole host of questions about the limitations of these abilities. To what extent can Achaemen actually flex this muscle, so to speak? No doubt there will be limitations, and to what extent does Achaemen even have conscious control over this ability? He might be able to do profound things, but that doesn't mean he has willed it to happen. But the second thought I have regarding this twist is much more sinister, and that is the suggestion that Achaemen is misunderstanding what has actually happened. Outside of the context of Seswatha's dreams, the simple fact that his dreams have changed is not that profound. And for this twist, he literally might just be seeing things that he wants to see. Maybe there is no map hidden in the coffers, and Achaemen just dreamed it, like a normal dream. This might be anticlimactic, but it could also work if written well. Achaemen is obviously a complicated character, so the thought of him being so consumed by his crusade that he deludes himself can be an interesting direction to take the story. And while I am touching upon Achaemen's complexity, it's worth mentioning the central conflict highlighted by this plotline. Anasarimber Kellis is a fraud. He has set himself up as the Jesus Christ of Irwa and used the religion to take over the world and manipulate everyone around him. But at the same time, he is doing this to save the world. The threat seems real, and Kellis might be the only one capable of stopping the second apocalypse. He is essentially the ultimate grim dark chosen one, and remains my favorite usage of the chosen one trope. Achaemen is wholly correct when he realizes that Kellis is a fraud, and even if Kellis is the one man capable of stopping the apocalypse, Achaemen is still wholly warranted in tracking down the origins of the Dunyain, if only to make sure nothing shady is up. But you also know that there is a serious personal grudge coloring his actions here. We don't know how he will take the information, and the idea that Bakker might have him misinterpret the information or operate on incomplete information, leading him to undermine Kellis, even as Kellis is necessary to save the world, is just too horrific to ignore as a possibility. I really hope that Bakker plays around with perspective like this, one way or another. Achaemen is still wholly Mimara is another very interesting character with a fascinating ability revealed at the end that, as with everything in this book, opens up so many possibilities I can't wait to see unfold. She is a character that Bakker has mentioned before. She is Esmond's daughter, namely her first daughter that she had to sell into slavery because she could not afford to feed her. She was eventually found by Esmond in a whorehouse pretending to be her mother because she looked like her. But she rejected her mother and left when Callus refused to teach her how to do sorcery. She is one of the few. After this, she tracks down Acamian because she suspects that he is her real father and tries to learn sorcery through him. Of course he refuses, but is also motivated to finally take action, which Mimar takes advantage of when she follows him. Mimar's very presence among the Skin Eaters, the band of scalpers that Acamian has chosen to travel with, provides so much tension as she is a woman among a bunch of rapists. It is only Acamian who can really protect her. And her interactions with men like Soma are interesting, and because I probably won't talk about his character in any other place in this post, I will quickly touch upon something about Soma's character. It was just a passing remark, but I remember Mimara mentioning how she trusted Soma because, unlike the other members of the group, he was not a man. Was this literal or figurative? I would assume the latter, either implying that he was a wuss or perhaps castrated, but it also occurred to me that he might be an actual woman, which could be interesting, but not likely. The most interesting part of Mimara's character is her newfound power at the end of the story's namesake, the judging eye. While all of the few have the ability to see the mark of sorcery and the threat of the Kore, she also has the ability to see the morality of the mark. She can see that the mark is condemned, and further, she can see what looks like the divinity of the Kore. This is significant because it shows that Callus is a fraud. He, as the incarnation of the god, has rewritten scripture, so that sorcery is no longer condemned. But with the judging eye, Mimara can see that Callus's proclamation carries no metaphysical weight. But there is another ability that the judging eye seems to confer when paired with the Kore. Not only is she able to see the divinity of the tier of God, but she is able to use the artifact to fight against the encroaching threat that their group was facing. This is rather hard to describe as the threat was ill-explained and rushed. Either way, when the group was about to be destroyed by the darkness embodied by the ghost of the non-man king, I think, Mimara is the one who is able to push it back and save their lives. I don't know how her ability to use this Kore will mix with her learning to use sorcery, but that is a question worth considering. And while I'm on the final stand, I want to talk about the scene as one of my negatives for the book, because this comes from the Sil August section of the book, which is an homage to the Mines of Moria. Mimara's last stand has been compared to Gandalf's last stand against the Balrog. Maybe this isn't fair, but either way, I think the scene was nowhere near as impactful. I'm talking about the Lord of the Rings movie, by the way. I haven't read the books. I thought Bakker's version was too rushed. I did not really understand the threat they were up against, and then the threat poofed out of existence far too quickly. The event kind of just happened, and I was left whiplashed, honestly. I don't think the threat needs a complete explanation, right? But I hardly even knew what was going on at all. This is just a problem of grounding. Bakker does sometimes suffer from getting too lost in his poetry. I think this was one example that kind of frustrated the reading experience a bit. A quick aside, the scene where the non-man king speaks through the mouths of Acamian and the other unconscious man has interesting parallels to how the no-gods spoke out of the mouths of Srank in the Seswatha dream we saw in The Prince of Nothing. And finally, an addendum, what did Mimara see when she looked at Anasarimber Kellis? She has the judging eye, right? I think the Skin Eaters also deserve some mention. They are a group of scalpers that Acamian hires to take him north, and they have such an interesting dynamic right out of the gate. Lord Casoter, Bakker's own Marlowe Stanfield, was already mentioned above, and his qualities are only enhanced by how he fits within the larger group that he's a part of. He is a leader, but he doesn't pay you any mind or even move a muscle unless you are worth noticing. He acknowledges Acamian only because he recognizes him as a veteran of the First Holy War. The dynamic he has with Sarl is distinctive and entertaining. And I should also mention that he has a Kore, which I think will become important later in the story. But the character with the most mystery about him is Cleric. Cleric is a man first seen obscured in a cloak, but he is quickly revealed to not be a man at all, but a non-man, which we have only seen from afar up to this point. And there is so much to this character. He is what is called an erratic, a non-man who has basically gone mad. He has lived for thousands of years, but has lost most of his memory of that time, now left a mere shell of himself. The non-men used to be a powerful and towering species, basically superior to human beings in every way, until their species was ravaged with infertility and other atrocities that left them in their desolated state today. And there are multiple interesting suggestions that Bakker has made here. First, he explicitly states on multiple occasions that non-men have the face of Srank, and also that Srank have the faces of non-men, which poses so many questions. Second, there are multiple remarks about how human beings were to non-men what Srank are to human beings. This also poses questions about the role of humanity in history and how that might tie into the current storyline. But I will save the wild speculation for the speculation and prediction section that I will place at the end of this review. There are also interesting questions regarding Cleric/Incarial specifically. The latter name is his non-man name, but Achaemen notably does not recognize his name from his readings, despite the fact that he ought to know him. This implies that something is up. Cleric is not who he claims to be, and he certainly cannot be trusted. And his role in the climax of the story is also ambiguous. There are multiple points where he seems to be dead, only to come back suddenly. We do not know what happened in that time, but we can certainly speculate endlessly. Chucky is the youngest son of Esmenet and Kellis, and he is the one we have the greatest understanding of in this point in the story. And he seems to be the worst of the bunch. Part of what makes him so terrifying is that he's just a child, someone who pines after his mother, but he's also a psychopathic and murderous. Esmenet thinks that Chucky is normal, but he is so intelligent that he thinks much like an adult, and he is constantly manipulating her attachment to him as a mother. This is one of Bakker's most fascinating character achievements, I think. Bakker has managed to create a child character, someone who has the typical naivete and playfulness and attachment to his mother and father, while also giving him a very adult-like feel in how he approaches the world. It's a very interesting conglomeration that Bakker manages to pull off, at least in my opinion. I remember George R. Martin talking about how Bran was the hardest character to write because he was so young, and Chucky has to be another level above that. Chucky never felt like a poorly written child character, but something deliberate, a preternatural child, if you will. I think Chucky's relationship to his twin brother is another interesting twist to this character. And I mean this aside from the fact that he killed his brother, because yes, that happens. Chucky was born conjoined to his brother, though I heard it mentioned that he might not have been physically conjoined, but mentally conjoined instead. My reading was that it was physical, but I guess other people disagree. Either way, this fact combined with the fact that Chucky was born with high intelligence and Samarmus was born mentally retarded makes me wonder about their connection. While reading, I immediately considered the possibility that Chucky basically stole Samarmus's intelligence and awareness, making him more intelligent than he should be. But I could not escape the fact that Esmenet thought Chucky was normal. Why, when the other children were so quickly sorted accordingly? Is this because Chucky is able to hide his abilities better, even from Kellis? Is Chucky smarter than his father, just younger and untrained? Another possible explanation is the fact that Chucky seems to have a dark passenger in his head. It does not seem like his dark passenger is metaphorical like Dexter's was in the show, but a literal thing like in the books. With this disconnect, his Dunyan abilities might be invisible to someone like Kellis even, which is a fascinating thought. Though there is reason to doubt this as well. There is a part where the dark passenger tells Chucky that he should not see his father, as his father will see through his face. So this just asks the question, why did Esmenet think that Chucky was normal? Did Kellis trick her about this? That's certainly not beyond his character, we just need the reason why. Another thing to mention, which I can't believe did not occur to me while reading, I heard another suggest it. Perhaps this dark passenger is actually Samarmus, and Chucky absorbed his consciousness. Or maybe Samarmus actually invaded Chucky. Maybe Chucky is actually nice and caring, and it's just Samarmus invading his mind and controlling him and making him this way. I already mentioned Esmenet's predicament in the non-spoiler section, that she is a ruler faced with all the responsibility and the discontent associated. An interesting thing that stood out to me was that Esmenet does not seem to be part of the illusion that Kellis is the incarnation of the god. She seems to understand that he is Dunyan even, but she has chosen this path. She is also incapable of loving Kellis, knowing that he is purely pragmatic. So while she is constantly being manipulated by her son, she seems less under the thumb of her husband. I admit I can't remember how things wrapped up in the Thousandfold Thoughts. I had problems going on at the time. Of course, I know that Esmenet chose him and married him, under Kelsis' influence, of course. But I forget if she learned what he was in that book. But because Bakker is Bakker, there are obvious reasons to doubt that she is free of Kelsis' manipulation as well. There is one notable scene where Kels returns home and speaks with Esminette, and we get this reassuring scene where Kels basically tells her that he trusts her to be able to handle the threat posed to the Empire, namely the White Luck warrior and her children. But I immediately thought that he might be using her. What if the plan is precisely for her to fail? Kels would do it. The question is why, which I will touch upon in the speculation scene. Satma is harder to commentate on because of just how vague so much of her perspective is, though I can use this to say that a little more grounding to the scenes would be helpful. Especially the moments leading up to where she has period blood sex with some man, stole his youth, and all in front of a crowd of worshipping people. I had no idea what was going on. However, the latter half, where the actual freakish sex scene happens, it actually benefited from the lack of clarity. Bakker can get away with so much of this weird shit because he's so poetic and vague about much of it. And I think her perspective shows that there is a delicate balance between poetic prose and precise prose. Another thing I want to talk about is a bit more involved and from an aspiring writer's perspective. I really liked how Bakker wrote this seemingly contradictory character with clashing traits. I described her with the words arrogant humility, and I think this is the perfect description. Bakker somehow managed to take these two contradictory traits and put them together in a way that makes sense. In a kind of hilarious fashion. Hilarious in a Bakker kind of way, though. We are first introduced to her roundly condemning other pious individuals for not having the right motivations. They care about status and signaling their piety. But not Satma. She is actually pious. She doesn't do it for worldly gain. She constantly has her eye on Yatwar, and she thinks about that all the time. She's at the top of that hierarchy of humility, boys. I don't have much more to add. The White Luck warrior is so peripheral and barely touched upon that I don't really know what to say or even speculate about. The title of the next book suggests that will change, though. I really enjoyed the chapters from Sorwheel's perspective. Not only is he a well-developed character in his own right, but he is also an excellent writing choice by Bakker, as he serves as an outside perspective to the great ordeal. Sorwheel is a younger character. I can't remember if his age was ever mentioned, but the impression I get is around 10 years of age. And because I'm an aspiring writer, I was focused on how Bakker wrote his character and how his age seemed to leak off the page, even if I didn't remember if he's explicitly aged. Namely, his tendency to look up to others, like his father and then to Zaronga. He had not passed into the age of rebellion just yet. And Bakker's ability to capture the perspective of the character, like the typical boredom of a child as he's forced to learn a new language, is as good as Martin when he writes Bran's character. And what both authors seem to do well is write about important political and philosophical matters from the perspective of a child. Bakker was able to communicate important ideas, like the scene with the broken vase, and even potentially profound developments regarding Kelso's power, while not losing Sorwheel's perspective. He does not entirely comprehend what is happening all the time, but the reader might. Alright, and then a quick addendum that I added after the fact. He is actually around 15 apparently. I know this basically contradicts what I just said, but another perspective about Sorwheel's view as a 15-year-old is that teens are kind of schizophrenic about their attitudes toward their parents. So this is another way to look at his character. As I said, this does contradict the statements above, but you can decide which is better if you have read the book yourself. Something that I did not actually grasp until it was suggested to me was that Sorwheel's slave might be protecting the boy from Kel's third eye. There was this weird scene where Prosperian, the slave, produces mud of some kind and then blesses Sorwheel by rubbing it on his face. I thought that this was just some cultural thing to world build and give the story depth, but it was suggested that the mud might actually be a magic ritual that prevents Kells from reading Sorwheel's face. This becomes significant at the end of the story when Sorwheel sees Kells in person for the second time. Sorwheel consciously rebels against him, reminding himself of what was done to his father, and Kells passes him by. My original thought was that Kells was tricking him, making him think that he was getting away with it, and making him toil over the thought that Kells might be playing some game. And this could still very well be true, but if the mud ritual is what it was suggested to be, then Kells might not actually be manipulating him. Bakker explicitly brings up this ritual after the encounter, so I think there is a good case to be made that it matters one way or another. Before I even begin, let me just say that these theories do not necessarily fit into some cohesive whole. They're just the scattered musings of my fanatic mind. The first thing I want to talk about is what I mentioned above in the section talking about Cleric. We know that non-men and Srank have the same face, and that human beings are to Srank as non-men are to humans. Let's touch upon the first one. The fact that they look alike has the obvious implication that they are related in some way. And we already know that the Srank are the creation of the Inkoroi, who crash-landed on this planet, and so are essentially aliens from outer space, with Golgotharoth being their massive spaceship. The Inkoroi most likely used the non-men as a model for the Srank, or perhaps even corrupted them, like how the Uruk-hai were corrupted elves. But the second one is another thing worth considering. Where did human beings come from? We understand that mankind came out of the east, but this is vague. Perhaps mankind is another kind of corruption, and the non-men are the only natural race on Irwa. How this ties into the Inkoroi, however, is rather fraught, so it really is speculative. But I suspect that mankind and the non-men will have some interesting reveals about their past. Another theory that I want to consider is the idea that Kellis might have a hand in Akamian's mad trek to the north. This comes down to the fact that Mymara actually saw Kellis and was therefore subject to whatever manipulation that he could put upon her. He refused to teach her the Gnosis, and it doesn't take a genius to see that Mymara would probably track down Akamian as the next resort. So Kellis would try to stop her if we understand his motivations, right? Maybe he simply was limited in his ability to manipulate her. He's not omnipotent, and she left and was able to think things over after the fact. She is headstrong after all. But maybe he did manipulate her, and maybe we don't actually understand his motivations. Maybe he has something planned for Akamian, and he knew that Mymara showing up on his doorstep would throw him into action. This would explain why Akamian isn't dead. It really is quite baffling that Kellis did not kill him, and the book's suggestion that Esbenet's guilt would be sufficient to explain this is easily undercut by the fact that Kellis would not care about how she feels. I think Kellis left Akamian alive for a reason, and him using Mymara to push him into action is simply an extension of this. This leaves the final theory, which is something that I have been thinking over for some time. One major pattern that has stuck out to me is the naming pattern for the series. There will be 3 series that used to be individual entries in a trilogy. The Prince of Nothing, the Aspect Emperor, and the No-God. Who is the Prince of Nothing? Kellis. Who is the Aspect Emperor? Kellis. Who is the No-God? Well, certainly not Kellis. He's here to stop the destruction of the No-God. Except my proposed theory is going to suggest that he is the No-God. What this means is that Kellis is not only a fraud who is organizing the whole world under a lie, but that he is the very threat that he claims to be fighting against. The idea is this. The first apocalypse failed. The No-God was defeated by the Heron Spear, even if the original ordeal ended in failure. But the Consult are going to try again, and they are going to take a couple thousand years to do it. In the intervening time, they will cultivate the Dunyain, a sect of monks who use eugenics to help them approach enlightenment intergenerationally. But the real reason is to create a vessel for the No-God, Kellis, that is able to accomplish the complete destruction of the world, unlike the last time. The previous No-God was originally a person who had not been selected for like Kellis has, and is therefore not equipped to withstand the Heron Spear, whatever that is. But Kellis will be. I think the unholy consult might end with the No-God being released on the world, with the knowledge that the Heron Spear no longer works. It would be the ultimate second act low, the ultimate Empire Strikes Back ending, where all hope seems lost before the final act of the story. This would also tie into Esbenet's plotline, as she would simply be Kellis' tool for destroying the 3 Seas, the point of last stand after the ordeal is destroyed. She completely breaks under the pressure, and the 3 Seas rips itself apart as a result. There are good reasons to doubt this theory. First, because it is vague. Apparently the Dunyain are a better vessel for the No-God, which assumes that there has to be a vessel that becomes the No-God, whatever that means. It also leaves completely open the question of why the Dunyain would be an improvement. We simply don't know enough to really say what any of this actually means. And there are 2 other reasons to doubt the theory, both relating to Kellis' character and relating to the themes of the story surrounding his character. The question is how much Kellis actually knows. The original idea I had was that this was all unwitting. After all, the Dunyain were ignorant of some things, like magic and the apocalypse, so if the entire purpose of the Dunyain was to create the No-God, it would have to be unwitting, which would help with the motivations at least. The monks simply think they seek enlightenment, but they are really just tools. I think the unwitting involvement, conjoined with the fact that there is a vessel used for the No-God, also neatly explains the strange depiction of the No-God as vulnerable. What do you see? I must know what you see. Tell me, what am I? I cannot see. And if it is unwitting, it should also be noted that Kellis would not be manipulating Esmenet, as he would not know to destroy the three Cs. Another possibility is that Kellis only had a vague understanding of his purpose upon entering the world. He filled in the details as he arrived, and is now taking more conscious action toward the goal of becoming the No God. This is so vague that the theory has little to no substance to fill it out, but I could honestly speculate millions of possibilities, who knows. I mentioned that there are thematic reasons to doubt this theory as well. One of the most compelling reasons the Chosen One trope works for me in this story is that Kells is an amoral character trying to save the world. There's complexity there that cuts right into your heart. Under this theory, Kells becomes an amoral character who wants to destroy the world, which is nowhere near as interesting. Perhaps the interest is preserved if Kells is unwitting, but I don't know. It would depend on the execution. Related is something that I mentioned in my review of The Darkness That Comes Before. What untold atrocities can you justify when you are up against someone who wants to kill everybody? Another appeal to this story is the moral discussion about what is permissible in situations like the apocalypse. As before, this theme kind of fails if Kells isn't actually trying to save the world. Overall, the theory is probably wrong. It simply comes from extrapolating what the No God is from how the series are titled. So I doubt it carries that much weight. But I knew it all along if it ends up being correct. Overall, I thought the book was an enjoyable read. I will give it a 7 out of 10.